Perfect. Okay, as I said, my name is Sarah Marchese. I work at FAS Research Computing as the Research Data Manager. I collaborate with faculty, staff, and researchers to better manage their research data throughout the data lifecycle. I offer consultations and training on topics like data storage, data organization, and data sharing techniques. I also develop data management resources and tools for FAS that can help you track your storage usage and prepare your data for sharing and reuse. And then I've also been working with a few different vendors to develop and refine data transfer processes. That's a big issue we see here at FAS. So we're working to refine those processes and assist researchers with data cleanup efforts and migrating data throughout the life cycle from active to long-term storage. So our learning objectives for today's 1-hour training, I'm going to talk about what research data management is and why it's important, including how to move data through your project lifecycle. I'll highlight some data management recommendations and procedures that you can start incorporating into your group, including those that are specific to Harvard. We'll review some data organizational techniques, making your data more discoverable and adhering to data management and sharing plans. I'll talk about those in more detail. We'll discuss how to improve your data analyses using collaborative tools like RSpace, which is an electronic lab notebook supported by Harvard, and other third-party tools like GitHub and Globus. I'll detail some of the storage offerings that are available through FASRC, as well as some of the recommended workflows around data retention, data security, and then data cleanup. We'll talk about different storage tools that are offered through FASRC that can help you with managing your storage. And then lastly, we'll discuss data sharing and reuse, including how you can use things like a data repository, and also how to make sure your data is considered open access. So the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, define research data management as the process of validating, organizing, protecting, maintaining, and processing scientific data to ensure the accessibility, reliability, and quality of the scientific data for its users. So with that definition in mind, why is the act of research data so important? I've listed some considerations there on the slide. But good data management techniques can prevent information from getting lost or misplaced or corrupted. It ensures that your data is accurate and reliable, which can lead to better overall research results. It allows for easier data collection, organization, and cleanup, which could ultimately save you a lot of time and effort and funding in the long run. Data management can make your collaboration both internally, among your lab members or at Harvard, but also externally with any collaborators, more efficient, as cleaner, more succinct data sets are easier to understand and reuse. Well-defined and accessible research materials are essential for reproducibility and transparency of your research. It also increases the impact of your research because you get credit for your data beyond your published article, but actually the data that you've produced. And various funding agencies and publishers now require that you submit data sets alongside your published articles. So it's not only recommended, but it's oftentimes required. So overall, just data management is a good research practice. And as a researcher and a scientist, I do recommend that you take the time to really look into the benefits of data management. So when we're talking about research data management, it's also good to keep in mind the FAIR data principles. These were published in 2016. They're a set of guiding principles to abide by that encourage reusability of digital research. So fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So what does that actually mean? What does that acronym stand for? So if you use these principles as a guide, you can ask yourself a few questions like, is your data findable or discoverable by others? Can others in your lab or even outside of your lab find and access your data? Is your data easily accessible to others in terms of accessibility. Can the data be accessible from different devices, or is it kind of locked to one computer and nobody else can access it? Is the data in a format that would make it available to everyone? So an example of this is, are you using a proprietary format like a Microsoft Excel document, or are you using more of an open source option like a text file or a CSV file? Is the data reusable? Does it actually contain enough context and information that other researchers would be able to use it for their research? So it's just good to keep the FAIR data principles in mind. They generally come into play at the end of your research project as you're getting ready to publish and you're sharing your data. But it is good to keep these principles in mind throughout the project, especially if you're starting a new project. It's good to make sure you're managing your data and adhering to this framework. I will go over these concepts in a bit more detail throughout the session, but I do suggest you just keep this acronym in mind as we make our way through the slide deck. And think about where your research data is in terms of FAIR and whether it would qualify. So we can also define scientific research data as the recorded factual material commonly accepted in the scientific community to be of sufficient quality to validate and replicate research findings, regardless of whether that data was used to support scholarly publications. So essentially, research data could be anything. It could be collected, it could be created, acquired in many different ways throughout the life cycle of your research project. It could be resulting from projects conducted here at the university or on Harvard property. It could also be developed or collected under the direction of the university, or even through research activities that are occurring elsewhere, but are using university resources like equipment or funding. The one thing to recognize here on this slide is that Harvard does have ownership over all research data that results from projects conducted here at the university and using university resources. And I'll talk about this policy in just a couple of slides. So I keep mentioning the research data lifecycle. So what is that? The research data lifecycle is just a representation of the different project stages, from your data creation to publication, and then how it manipulates any associated research data. So the life cycle generally begins with planning and design of your project, followed by data generation and analysis. Then we have to be thinking more about data storage and preparation for publication. And then finally, data sharing and reuse at the end of your project. So not every project is going to follow this exact course or move fluidly from one stage to the next. There might be instances where you'll have to reverse course or reanalyze a data set or acquire new data sets from an outside entity. But in general, most research projects will follow this linear path. The data management activities may also vary depending on your discipline, institution, or project, which generally makes offering data services at a broader level like FAS or at the institutional level a bit of a challenge. I do like to also discuss the different types of data generated at each stage of your research project. So you'll have your source data or raw data. This is any data that's hasn't been processed, modified, or analyzed. It could be deriving from things like an instrument, or you could have acquired it from an outside entity. Maybe you downloaded the data set from a repository. And then during your data processing, this raw data is cleaned, sorted, and filtered to reduce the number of unnecessary, inaccurate, or redundant fields. Oftentimes people forget about this step or they don't consider it especially important, but it does ensure higher quality results and can help to streamline your data analysis process. Moving on, analyze data. So data analysis is the process of inspecting, cleansing, transforming, and modeling your data with the ultimate goal of discovering useful information, informing conclusions, and supporting your decision-making. And then lastly, you'll have your published data. So this is any data that's published alongside your scholarly work. In the last decade, it's become increasingly common for researchers to publish their data and make it available to others, generally in a data repository or in other tools that allow for sharing. All right, so now that we understand kind of what research data management is and the research data lifecycle and why data management is important, we should review some data management policies and procedures that apply here at the university. We'll talk about how you can draft a data management and sharing plan. We'll discuss different data use agreements, or DUAs as they're commonly referred to, and how they might apply to your research project. We'll talk about roles and responsibilities around data within your lab and how to organize your data with some recommendations around file naming conventions and directory structures. I recommend that you be cognizant of any existing lab, department, or university policies and procedures. There are also some policies and procedures from funders as well, so keep that in mind. So at Harvard, we have the research data ownership policy. I kind of hinted at this in a previous slide, but it generally states that the university is the owner of all research data produced and analyzed for projects at the university. But it also stipulates that your PI or group manager is responsible for maintaining that data, and they are considered the data steward of the research data sets. The research data security policy. This is just general guidance on how to keep your data safe and secure, especially around confidential or sensitive information. We have the retention and maintenance of research records FAQ. This is an institutional policy that stipulates any quote unquote essential research records need to be retained for a period of no fewer than 7 years after the end of a research project. There are examples in a upcoming slide of what an essential research record is, but it does cover quite a bit. And the thing to note is the 7-year retention period. Like I said, there are other funder policies that you should be aware of, especially if you are working with data that you acquired through an NIH or NSF grant. They have their own data management sharing policies, as well as other guidance from regulatory groups like the GDPR or General Data Protection Regulation, which deals with data coming from the European Union. So what is a data management plan? A data management plan, or DMP, or you can oftentimes hear it referred to as a data management and sharing plan. It's just a formalized document that outlines how your data will be handled during and after a research project. Many funding agencies, again, NIH and NSF and others, do require a data management plan to be provided as part of that grant application process. Even if you're not seeking funding from one of these entities, it is good just to document your plan for research data. It's just nice to kind of be thinking about this ahead of time as you're starting your project. And it's going to be sure that you're complying with all of those policies that we just went over. Funders will expect your data management plans to be periodically updated throughout the entirety of your research grant. So you will need to make sure the document's up to date and altered to reflect any changes that might have occurred throughout the project. So initially, if you thought you were going to store your data in one location and then that became impossible or very costly and you had to make changes to your storage option, then you will want to make sure that you're referencing that and updating your data management plan accordingly. Harvard does offer an online template that you can use to actually build a data management plan. It's in DMP tool. So I have a picture there on the slide of what it looks like. But it provides Harvard specific guidance on how to draft and submit a data management plan. There are also other templates that are available for NSF, NIH, and others. So I highly recommend you use it. It is a free tool that's offered through the library. You just log in with your Harvard email or Harvard key, and then you have access to those resources. So highly recommend it. You may also be required to follow a DUA or a data use agreement in order to acquire your data sets. So I just wanted to highlight those here as well. A DUA is a binding contract that governs the access to and treatment of non-public data. DUAs are often required by external parties before they'll let you utilize the data. or provide it to Harvard. And it may also be necessary if you're providing Harvard data to another entity, you might be required to draft a DUA as well. DUAs are considered research-related agreements and therefore must be reviewed and signed by the Office of the Vice Provost for Research, or OVPR, and they have an online tool that you can use to draft and submit those DUAs. The terms and conditions will vary depending on the laws and regulations that are governing that type of data. So, if you're using human subjects data, you might have different requirements than just other proprietary data. And so you'll have to take those into consideration when you're drafting or agreeing to a data use agreement. These formal agreements do help to avoid any misunderstandings or disputes over the use and storage of the data. They also stipulate appropriate access and security measures and other important matters like publication rights and ownership of results. So data management responsibilities, they are going to extend beyond your PI or a group leader, or even the researcher who initially created or collected the data. There are various parties that will be involved in the research process and will play a role in ensuring quality data stewardship. So it is essential that these roles and responsibilities are clearly defined and assigned in your lab. Oftentimes people make assumptions, and it's always good just to make sure that you're aware of what your role is in your lab. Identifying specific tasks and responsible parties is going to help with budgeting, implementation, and preservation of data resources. I do recommend that your lab nominate what we call a research data manager, just someone in your lab who can act as a primary contact around questions like data storage, data sharing, data security, things like that. Other responsibilities that a data manager could take on are promoting and supporting data management best practices, organizing folder structures, assigning file names, or identifying data that could be moved to long-term storage or deleted. Speaking of data organization, one of the most tangible ways that I see that can make immediate improvements to your lab's data organization is through implementation of a consistent and streamlined directory structure. So in general, I recommend that you arrange files hierarchically, or the idea of folders within folders, so nested folders. I also recommend that you organize your data based on project rather than by individual. So I often see that labs will have separate folders for each individual lab member. And while that can be easy to set up initially and easy to maintain, everyone just maintains their own folder. It can get complicated if you have a very collaborative project that you're working on within the lab. It also often silos data, which is not great. So I do recommend that it's preferred to create one folder for each project. And within that project folder, you can have separate subfolders for things like documentation, data, and code. This organizational structure is familiar, it's widely utilized. It's also good at representing the structure of information and the files that were generated throughout the project. So in this example, you can see on the slide, we have a top folder for the project and then subfolders for data, code, and documentation. You'll also notice that the data folder has been divided into raw and processed data, so data type. It's always a good practice to keep your raw data separate so that it's not modified or lost or manipulated in any way. As soon as the data is manipulated, it can be saved in a separate folder as processed data. Again, there's no, preferred or ideal way to organize your folders, but this is my suggestion. The best system, though, is going to be the one that works well with your research project and the data that you're generating. So within each project folder, I do recommend recording all information that might be needed to help interpret the context and the content of those files. Sufficient documentation often determines whether older data sets can be reused, especially if context is lost over time. So some of these projects that we see are decades long. And if you start to lose the context of things like abbreviations or who worked on the data set or why the data set was kept versus deleted, some of that context, it gets really difficult to reuse that data in the future. So I do recommend creating some documentation like a README file that can provide that additional context. Other options could include a paper or a lab notebook, electronic lab notebook, a code book, or a data dictionary. On the slide is a nice example of a project README file that was created by Cornell University. It's just a flexible text file that you can put into the folder itself that provides additional context. If you're expecting to deposit data sets in a data repository at the end of your project, the repository may even ask you to provide a README file with additional details about those data sets, like methodological information or any like access information. So just creating that README file at the beginning of your research process and then just updating it consistently throughout the project lifecycle is just going to make it easier to share that at the end. No matter the format, there should just be enough detail that another researcher could pick up the folder and complete your work. They would know exactly what's in that folder, how it was generated. Again, avoid any proprietary formats when creating these types of documents. So Microsoft Word documents or Excel spreadsheets. I prefer a text file that you can actually put in the folder itself. Similar to the establishment of a well-defined directory structure, you can also significantly improve searchability of your files just by having a file naming convention. So a file naming convention could include key pieces of information about the file that can make it easier to visually or digitally scan. You can immediately discern what the contents of the file are just by looking at the name. So general recommendations for establishing a file naming convention for your project, maintain the same file naming convention throughout the project, describe what the files contain and how they relate to each other, include useful information like date or project title, maybe a unique identifier. When you're working with lots of files, it's always good to have file versioning. So you could indicate V2 or V3 for the different versions. Steer clear of any confusing terminology like final or draft. You can also use file versioning tools. So Google Drive and Dropbox have built-in version control, which is great. Again, just determine what information is vital to the project and the data sets, and then build out the file names from there. All right, so we're making our way through the research data lifecycle. We're moving from data planning into data creation and analysis. In this section, I wanted to highlight a few useful collaborative tools that you can use to improve your workflow, and also some data transfer tools as well. So RSpace, also known as Research Space, is an open source electronic lab notebook, or ELN, that is supported by Harvard's University Research Computing Group. And it can help you organize, store, and share different types of data, including protocols, analysis, and experimental notes. And it's in a centralized, secure platform. Tailored for academic environments and the research workflow. In general, ELNs can help manage and track your research data. They facilitate good research data practices. They support data review and oversight. They enable group collaboration, and you can even manage things like inventories of samples and other equipment. Another free and open source project management tool that you can use is called the Open Science Framework. It's provided by the Center for Open Science, and it supports researchers throughout their entire project lifecycle using open centralized workflows, and enables the capture of different aspects and products of research. It's also considered a data repository, so you can store and archive your research data there, as well as protocols and other materials. So I actually use OSF personally for things like presentations or conference materials. So it can really house any type of research products. GitHub, pretty much everyone's familiar with GitHub. It's a web-based service for Git repositories. It's commonly used for managing and sharing versions of code. It is also an open source tool, so it's not technically hosted by Harvard. So please keep that in mind. We do strongly encourage you to retain a copy of your files somewhere else as well, just in case anything happens, because it's not managed by Hewitt or Harvard IT. So data transfers can be difficult. Oftentimes it's challenging to get data to be moved from one platform to another. I did want to list a few possible tools that you could use for data transfers. The selection of the tool is going to depend on the size of the data set, your data security level, how you need to access the data set, how many files there are, etc. But these are 4 common data transfer tools that you can use, including Globus, which enables file sharing with external collaborators. So it's really great for sharing out data to other institutions or folks outside of Harvard. It is a web browser, so it's pretty easy to use. The interface is very user-friendly. There's rsync, which is a fast and versatile file copying tool. The nice thing about rsync is it only migrates modified files from your source to destination. So if something happens in the middle of the transfer, it just starts right back up where it was, which is great. There's FileZilla, which is an open source client that is available across platforms. So you can use it on things like a Mac, a Windows, or a Linux device. And then there's rclone, which is a convenient and performant command line tool that can transfer files and synchronize directories, especially between FASRC and Google Drive is a common way that people use rclone. All right, so in this section, we'll review some recommended data storage workflows. We'll talk about migrating data from your active to long-term storage, what some of the rules are related to data retention and archiving, what storage options are available through FASRC, how to keep your data secure and backed up, and then as you're finishing up your project, how you can engage in data cleanup efforts. So similar to the creation of a data management plan, a DMP at the start of your project, it is also helpful to create a data storage plan, kind of outlining how to store and organize your data throughout the project. To help you get started, I've developed some questions that you can ask yourself related to data storage, as you're developing this data storage plan. So where will you be keeping your data throughout the project? When and for how long should your data be retained? Different institutions and granting agencies will have different requirements for how long data needs to be retained. As I mentioned, Harvard says 7 years as part of their institutional policy, but your grant might also have its own stipulations that are longer. And so the general idea is, however, whatever's the longest date is what you have to adhere to. So if your grant says that it needs to be retained for 10 years, Harvard says 7, you do have to keep it for 10 years to meet those requirements. What other data types are you going to need to store? So beyond just your research data, are you going to need to store code, protocols, documentation, other materials, etc.? What formats will your data be in? How are you going to save your files? Like I said, I generally recommend interoperable formats rather than proprietary. So once you've thought through each of these questions in more detail, I would notate your answers in a data storage plan. Again, it could be as simple as a text file or just incorporating this information into your existing lab documents. And it's just something you can refer back to throughout the project, or as new members come into the lab, they'll know exactly where they're supposed to be depositing their data. And it's easy to review in case of onboarding or offboarding of lab members. So how the research data is going to be used and accessed will determine where your data should reside. So similar to this idea of a research data lifecycle, you'll also want to be lifecycling your data through a storage workflow from active to long-term storage. So as you begin to generate or acquire raw data, you'll want to store that data in an active storage location where it's readily accessible and you can view your data and analyze and process it. Soon after you generate or acquire the raw data, it should be moved to an intermediate location so that it remains protected and separate from your analyzed data. And then once your data has been analyzed and it's no longer being frequently accessed or modified, this is a great time where it could be moved to a long-term storage option. Data that should be moved to long-term storage can include published data sets or data sets associated with finished projects, or if a lab member has left the lab, but the data might still need to be used, or actual archive data. So after a project is completed, you'll want to reevaluate your data and determine whether it could be moved to long-term storage, destroyed, or archived. Many institutions, including Harvard, have an archive or special collections unit whose mission it is to collect, maintain, and provide access to records of enduring value for historical and research purposes. Records eligible for permanent retention may be those that document a scientific breakthrough or were generated by a lab or individual who has had great impact on their field. Or maybe it's a really, highly reusable data set for that particular area of research. And so it's, commonly referred to. It is good to keep in mind that archival data is not the same as long-term storage. So the permanent retention or archiving of data is often a significant investment for the institution, as it implies the ongoing migration of electronic formats. It also often comes with a storage cost. It's also, hard to maintain and provide access to. So the amount of data that's considered archival versus just data that needs to be kept to meet those data retention policies is going to be much smaller. While most research data and records are just kept, like I said, to meet minimum requirements for data retention policies, there are small amounts of data that could actually apply as archival data. Often the cost of long-term storage is prohibitive for researchers, so you might not be interested in storing or maintaining data any longer than actually necessary. Should your research data not meet that criteria for permanent retention or archiving, you may want to take steps to ensure that you have safely and completely disposed of that data once it meets the specified retention period. Disposal of research data may include deleting, destroying, disk wiping, or otherwise disassembling any materials that are holding your data in a way that ensures that data cannot be reconstructed or extracted. Always check with the policies of the institution or funder to make sure that you are able to destroy the data and that it's in line with all the research record and data policies. I also recommend creating an inventory of the records that are getting deleted and just include information like format, dates, and any other relevant information so that if you do delete that data, you have that record in case it ever comes up again and folks say, where did that data go? And you could actually point to your inventory and say, we deleted it as of this date. The benefit of documenting the disposal of research data, like I said, is multifold, including responsible data management of the full life cycle of your data, and it also avoids future confusion about missing or abandoned data. We've kind of covered data retention in a few other slides, but I did want to provide a little bit more context. So data retention is the length of time that data needs to be kept to meet those funder requirements or institutional policies. Understanding data retention is going to help with budget planning and determining how long that you need to pay to house that data. Ultimately, the retention will depend on the type of data, the purpose for which the data has been collected, policies of the funding institutions or the parent organization, other entities like the IRB, or if there's intellectual property, if it's human subjects data. So there's all these additional factors that might affect the retention time. The data retention policies here at Harvard only apply to essential research data and records. So I mentioned that previously, but what does that actually mean? What data is actually considered essential research data? So this is data that's integral to substantiating grant applications, published research, or patents, or records, like I said, that have permanent preservation and access. So there's a list there of some examples of essential research records, including records associated with grant applications, proposals, and other funding requests, any records needed to substantiate compliance with sponsored research, records associated with published research and patents, scholarship considered for long-term preservation, and then data or materials designated as essential by the school. So there is some flexibility there. If the school or department determines it worthwhile to keep, that might be considered an essential research record. So how does long-term storage differ from archival storage? Most people use these terms interchangeably. They are technically two different types of data storage. We've kind of gone over this a little bit, but long-term storage is the storage of research records that just need to meet those retention requirements, whereas archiving is the permanent retention of research data for reuse by other researchers. Actual archived data is based on an appraisal process. So you'll actually work with an archivist who will review the data and see whether it needs to be permanently retained. There also needs to be clear ownership of the data, and there needs to be enough comprehensive and contextualized information to understand the value. All right, so now that we understand that it's important to migrate data through your data lifecycle and to move it through the data storage lifecycle based on its utility and accessibility, we can review the various storage offerings that are provided by FASRC. So we have several active lab storage options. They're very similar. It really just depends on whether or not you would like backups or disaster recovery. That's really the only difference between the three options. They are providing high performance storage. It's designed for active data as they both have, or all three have pretty high read write speeds. We have FASRC, which is our secure cluster environment. It does provide access to a secure enclave. So if you have certain requirements from a DUA or the IRB, and it's more of a sensitive data set with a higher level of security, you can keep it in our secure cluster environment, or FASRC. And then we do have a long-term storage offering that is in partnership with NESI, which is the New England Storage Exchange. So for data that needs to meet those data retention requirements, to meet compliance, publishing, or institutional retention requirements, you can place it in our long-term storage or our tape environment. I like to reiterate the tape really is not designed for any active data. This is for data that no one's going to be using. It should not be, expected to be retrieved anytime soon. So it's really considered a cold storage environment. So the type of data that you're working with is also going to dictate the data security level, or where and when and how the data needs to be stored or handled. So understanding data privacy and security requirements is going to be necessary to secure any sensitive and personally identifiable information of research subjects. It is a fundamental obligation grounded in the values of stewardship, integrity, and commitment to the original data source. So most institutions indicate security levels for their research data. Harvard maintains a multi-level security system, which includes 5 data security levels from 1 to 5, depending on the data sets. And the nice thing about that is that we can actually indicate which tools and platforms can be used for each level. So for example, if you are on Harvard's Google Drive or our Harvard Dropbox, you can store up to level 3 data. So any data that's level 1 through 3 can be stored on those platforms. Similarly, a lot of our active storage goes up to level 2. So any data that's level 1 or 2 can go in our active lab storage. So it is good to be familiar with your data type and which security level is associated with it. In terms of data security, one straightforward data security strategy that I can recommend is called the 3-2-1 rule. This rule stipulates that you should be retaining 3 copies of your data on 2 different types of storage formats, with one type being offsite. So for example, if you want to maintain a master copy of your raw data on your lab computer, that lab computer should ideally be using a backup tool like CrashPlan, and the backup should be stored in an offsite storage like a cloud resource. This should hopefully prevent total data loss from any localized events like fire, flood, or theft. And it makes sure that your data is spread across multiple types of storage, so you're diffusing the risk. If the data is lost, you have another copy. So while it is important to think about data retention and long-term storage at the end of your data lifecycle, it is equally important to think about data deletion and cleanup. A significant issue that we do see across the university is this accumulation of unnecessary or duplicative data sets that are long past their usefulness. So we recommend connecting with your PI or group leader to discuss what data actually needs to be retained and what data sets can be removed. I do also recommend placing data and documentation, like I said, in a group folder, as this ensures any important data and files are not lost if lab members leave. And then make sure to follow all retention policies and guidelines and confirm with the general record schedule that the data type in question can actually be removed. It is imperative to think about data cleanup as lab members are preparing to leave either the lab or the university, and should be integrated into your lab offboarding procedures. Some of my recommendations when it comes to offboarding is to review and organize your research data and document storage locations in a README file. Back up and move any personal files or departmental files from your local computer or your local storage to group storage locations, and then confirm that the files are actually accessible by your PI or group leader. Transfer folder and website ownership to remaining group members as needed. Identify any data that can be deleted or moved to long-term storage. Make sure any other documentation, code, or maybe your electronic lab notebooks are also accessible to remaining group members or collaborators. And then consult with your PI or group leader about transferring data to other institutions. So if you're leaving the institution and you're interested in taking data with you, just know that you do have to get approval from your PI and the university in order to take any data with you. So here are some data cleanup examples. So for instance, a lab member leaves the lab with their data and then doesn't inform the PI what data was removed. So a solution to that problem would have been clearly documenting what files exist and where they're stored in a README file so the project can continue following their departure, and then checking with their PI or group leader before removing data belonging to the university. Another issue we see a lot is data is kept on a personal laptop or a cloud account, maybe their own personal Google Drive or Dropbox or OneNote. And then the lab member leaves and their computer's wiped, and so all the data is gone. So a solution to this would be to ensure that that data is placed in a shared group storage before they leave, and then confirm that the PI has access to all that data. To help your group manage storage and cluster usage, we have developed a few storage tools, one of which is ColdFront. ColdFront is an open source resource allocation system that is really a central portal for modifying things like your storage allocations or adding and removing users from your group accounts, adjusting storage notifications. So it's a really useful tool that we provide to our users that really gives them more agency into how they're managing their storage. Another tool is the Starfish Zone interface, which is a self-service tool that allows our users to view their storage amounts and locations. It's really great for navigating folder structures. You can see additional metadata about the storage, like who created the file, when it was last accessed, last modified, how many files are in that directory. So it's really useful, especially when you're thinking about data cleanup. It is still in development, so it will continue to change, but we'll update you if there are any upcoming outages. Moving on to data sharing. So the data that you share will vary based on your project and research area. However, enough data should be provided to allow for reproducibility or replication. If you've been keeping your data organized and documented, hopefully throughout the project, then these activities will become a lot easier. So to publish data, we do need some infrastructure to help support this, and that's where data repositories come in. They offer discoverability and long-term accessibility of your data. The idea that you can post data to a personal website or just offer a link from a Google Drive, it's not really possible anymore. A lot of the funders are going to require that you actually put it in a established data repository, as they provide technical infrastructure for access, curation, and provide a framework for describing your data with metadata standards. There are generally three types of data repositories. You have institutional, discipline, and then generalist repositories. Institutional repositories like Harvard Dataverse are for researchers at that particular institution. You have disciplinary repositories like TB-GAP or GEO for genomic data that target specific types of data. And then you have generalist repositories. These are repositories that are generally approved for any type of data. They're very universal, and so they're often supported by like NIH and NSF as options in case you don't have an institutional repository or a disciplinary repository that's available to you. Typically, you'll start by identifying any funder stipulated repositories. So you might have to put it in a specific repository depending on your funder. And then if you don't, any data that's generated that you have no data repository specified, you can always just put it in a generalist data repository appropriate for that data and in accordance with desired characteristics. So what do generalist repositories offer, and what should you be looking for when you're selecting a repository? So I've listed some advantageous characteristics of general repositories on the slide, including unique and persistent identifiers like DOIs, long-term sustainability of your data sets, meeting granting and funder requirements, metadata schemas, data curation services, free access to open data sets, data security and access controls. Oftentimes it's free up to a certain amount of data. So if you have a small data set, it's oftentimes free for deposit. It meets those general data retention policies from major funders, and again, supports that idea of fair data. I did want to highlight Harvard Dataverse because that is a platform that we support and we encourage folks to use. It's a free web-based data repository open to all researchers from any discipline. So it technically is considered a generalist repository. You can share, download, archive, cite, and explore research data through the platform. You can open your data up to everyone, to the general public, or you can restrict access and define certain terms of use. When you publish your data, you automatically get a DOI, and your metadata is open and findable via general search engines like Google. You can deposit up to 2.5 terabytes per account. You can also ask for additional storage for a fee in consultation with IQSS and Harvard Library. As a generalist repository, Dataverse does accept any file type. It's discipline agnostic, which is great. And this can mean that some data formats might be better served by a dedicated repository. Like if you have genomics data, like I mentioned, you might prefer to put that in a different repository, but Harvard Dataverse technically can accept that type of data. Data curation services are also available to help researchers and institutions offset some of the labor and the administrative burden associated with creating and maintaining those Dataverse collections. So again, that is provided with the library. So I would check in with them if you're interested in additional data curation services. So open access is an international movement that is seeking to grant free and open online access to academic information, including publications and data. A publication is defined as open access when there are no financial, legal, or technical barriers to accessing the data. Anyone can read, download, copy, distribute, print, search for, and search within the information, and they can use it in educational or other ways. There are two major ways that you can make your publications open access. So publish in an open access journal or deposit in an open access repository like DASH, which is Harvard University Library's open access repository. Harvard's open access policy does state that members grant the presidential fellows of Harvard College the permission to make their scholarly articles open access. So basically that means that Harvard is able to take all publications and make them open access. All right, to wrap up, I just wanted to reiterate some of the tools and services that we went over today and then how they align in the data lifecycle. So as you're setting up your research project, you can use things like an electronic lab notebook like RSpace, and you can also use DMP tool to help with development of a data management plan. As you're analyzing your data, I do recommend using tools like protocols.io, GitHub, and Open Science Framework to help track your data, code, protocols, and other materials throughout your project. In terms of storage, there are data management tools available, including Starfish, Globus, and ColdFront that can help with data organization, data transfers, and data review and cleanup. And then as you're finishing your project and depositing data in a data repository like Harvard Dataverse, you can also look into long-term storage options like Dash and Nessie Tape, which is again through the Northeast Storage Exchange.